Hello and welcome to a Breaking It All Down vlog. I am sorry for taking so long to get to the next Nintendo retrospective review, but, well, school's been causing problems, it's getting closer to midterms, all that fun stuff. With appropriate sarcasm on the fun. So, however, I did go see Skyfall today. I'm going to talk about that now, give my thoughts on it. I will try to go fairly far in to this video without giving spoilers. When it comes to spoiler time, I will hold up a notepad to the screen with the words "spoilers here" written on it. If you're watching this on the blip feed, then after this point I will put in a commercial, or at that point I will put in a commercial break, just to make it clear this is where the spoilers are, and that you can stop. I will try to do a similar thing on YouTube. Now, last time I did a movie review vlog, somebody reported it as being infringing or something, so I couldn't monetize it, so I might not be able to do the mid-thing ad roll. So, for the same so, again, look for the notepad. If you don't want spoilers past that point, don't watch any further. Now, for spoilers, I'm going to be considering as spoilers anything that's not covered in the trailer to the film. And also, won't go into details about I'll kind of discuss the opening credits sequence, because it's a Bond film. It's going to have a psychedelic opening credits sequence, but I'll try not to get too much into describing what it is. But anyway, as is a vlog, I will be drinking something. So, let us begin. First thing I gotta say is, this Bond film, as a film, I would say it's the most un-Bond-like, because it's a Bond film, but it kind of shows off how far we've come since the old days of Sean Connery, and even, for that matter, Roger Moore, and all the way up to Brosnan. And I bring this up because this is the 50th anniversary of the franchise. And I'm gonna be honest, most of the earlier Bond films, I would say practically all of the earlier Bond films, if you suggested do something I'm going to do something artsy in how I'm shooting this film, they'd say, "Oh, you mean you're going to do something clever and psychedelic for the opening credits, right?" And then if you said, no, beyond that, they'd look at you funny. You don't think of artsy stuff with lighting or framing or that sort of thing when you think of a Bond film. You may do quick editing and brisk cuts and that sort of thing. But the closest really came to sort of anything different, or a distinct, really major style difference with the editing and stuff for a Bond film, was kind of dying of their day. But even then, Lee Tamahori's style was more of a quick cut music video commercial style, as opposed to clever framing or neat stuff with lighting or that sort of thing. But with this film really, really gets artsy. Not like, how to put this? Seijun Suzuki level artsy. If you're familiar with Japanese art film, I'm not going to say art film, but Japanese kind of grindhousey stuff, or if you've seen Kill Bill Volume 1, you might have seen some homages to his style. A good example of this in Kill Bill Volume 1 is the scene with the crazy 88s. The part where everyone's in silhouette on a shifting colored background. And this film kind of does that. It does lots of stuff with lights and shadow. With silhouettes and voids and that sort of thing. It's the last thing you expect in a Bond film. The last thing, when you think of a Bond film, you say, when you think of clever lighting, clever setting, clever set design, you think, oh, volcano base. Think, oh, interesting car chase. Maybe, oh, a sequence in the ice hotel. You think that. You don't think a fight scene done completely in silhouette, where it's done not like totally in shadow, like there's this bad ninja movie from the 80s, or there's their entire fight scene in the dark. Not like pitch black, can't see anything, but in silhouette. You don't think that. And this one really makes all the difference. It's basically, it's like the director said, you know, We take musical cues from the theme, from the title theme, and use that in the score throughout the movie. We've done that since the beginning. Why not we take little visual cues and ticks from the opening and find clever and inventive ways to work those in to the film? And it works wonderfully. Similarly, speaking of the opening credits, this is, without going in depth in terms of describing the imagery, is the best opening credit sequence of any Bond film ever. I put this in my top 5, and at the top of the top 5, better than GoldenEye, with the opening credits kind of symbolizing the shift in time with the end of the Cold War and what we think of as the classic Bond era, with the start of a new Bond and this new world that we're in and how we're adapting Bond to this film. It's better than that. It's better than World Is Not Enough, talking about where the opening credits, while the film itself has to do with oil and oil pipelines and that sort of thing as the driving force of the plot, the opening credits also kind of get into oil as in terms of that's the new big geopolitical thing now. It's not nuclear weapons, although there is some of that, but also oil and who controls the world's energy, and that sort of thing. So there's that, those ones, but this is better. This is really better. This is a Bond film which, I mean, you've seen the opening credit, you've seen the trailer, you know at the beginning of the film, Bond gets shot and is presumed dead, and then appears to come back from the dead. There's the whole line used in the trailer for a quip of, everyone needs a hobby, what's yours? Resurrection. And death and resurrection, the inevitability of death, and how being surrounded by so much death and all this stuff has to do with Bond's work, comes into the opening credits. And it's got your cavorting naked women, it's got Bond shooting guns, it's like a fever dream. It is like the fever dream of a dying man, which I think is the point. Because the credit sequence begins right after Bond gets hit and falls off the bridge, like you see at the trailer. It's not a big spoiler to say that. And the only Bond film whose opening credits really did something like that was Die Another Day, where the opening credits kind of tied into the torture that Bond was undergoing in North Korea. But it never really felt like it was getting into Bond's head. Sort of, but not quite. But these opening credits are seriously the best opening credits in the series. They tie the film together the way that The Rug and The Big Lebowski tied the room together. That said, I don't like the film's score. All the Bond films before this, even when they had composers who weren't like Dave Arnold or John Barry, like with Michael Kamen's score for License to Kill, they kind of recognize that Bond films, even if you're messing with the formula, they have little things, they're ticks that you, like minor keys. Like the scores are generally symphonic. Well, occasionally, like with License to Kill, they'll muck around with it a bit, like Spanish guitar or that sort of thing. Because, well, like for example, License to Kill was primarily in not Panama. But this one, very electronic score, very techno beatsy. And some of this is kind of related to what I think is the theme they're doing for the film's villain, Mr. Silva, played by Javier Bardem, who is, by the way, excellent. But when we get moments of symphonic stuff, when the orchestra kicks in, not just with the James Bond theme, but just in general, when the orchestra kicks in, when they slip in a few notes from Adele's excellent theme song, Skyfall, when all this stuff fits in, it feels like a breath of fresh air. which is really good. And I would like more score stuff in this. In fact, this is probably the one Bond film where I wouldn't want to own the score. I might buy the theme song on iTunes or Amazon or something like that, but I wouldn't buy the full soundtrack. And that kind of is a minus. And it makes me glad that Dave Arnold's absence is not permanent, that he will be back, that he will, like James Bond, return in future films. Because I like his score a lot better than this guy's. I really do. Now, in which I spoke of Javier Bardem, let's talk about him. He is extraordinary. He is, beyond the shadow of a doubt, the best Bond villain ever. If you're suspecting this is leading me up into saying that this is the best Bond film ever, you are correct. This is, in my opinion, the best Bond film thus far. There may be future films which surpass this, but this film exceeds everything which came before. But Javier Bardem is amazing as Silva. He's the Joker to Bond. The Joker's the Joker to Bond's Batman. He is creepy in ways that most earlier Bond villains haven't really been. He's menacing. He is both a physical and psychological menace. While he uses technology and primarily works behind the scenes, his character in earlier press coverage has kind of been compared to Julian Assange if Julian Assange was a Bond villain. And he's kind of like that. He's just creepy, he's sadistic, he's devious. A while back, I had a thought in my head of what would make a great Bond villain for the 21st century. And the thought I had was a socially maladjusted hacker who is angry, who is fed up with the status quo. He's had enough, and he's going to destroy it all and force the world to rebuild into something else, ideally something more of his choosing. And this isn't that character, but I can see him from there, and that's good. I like that. It's a Bond film that recognizes the world has changed, that actually the kind of world has changed in a kind of way where while villains who want to destroy the entire world or hold the world for ransom, like Spectre or the Roger Moore Bond villains, in terms of threaten the world with total annihilation at their hands, those villains won't work in this world we live in now. That villains who might seek to destroy and control the world through subtler methods still work, and perhaps work better than they ever would have before, and thus an organization. And this kind of ties in with how well Quantum has worked so well with the first two films, and hopefully when they bring them back in the third film, or the fourth film, that they will continue with this sort of trend and this way of working out how these villains work. So, with that, it's time to hold up this. Take the effort to make sure that it's clearly in focus and visible, so that that you can all see it. I'm entering the spoiler zone. You've had 13, almost 14 minutes of spoiler-free discussion. So, those were my thoughts. Without spoilers, now it's time to get into the actual big spoilers of this. This is the first time, really, with the possible exception of Sean Bean in GoldenEye, where we've had a Bond villain who was a dark mirror of Bond, who was basically a former agent who turned against MI6 for various reasons, dissatisfaction with Britain and other things. With GoldenEye, it was Britain's chickens coming home to roost in terms of the Allies' betrayal of the Lance Cossacks, which I discussed when I was talking about when I was talking about the video game, and how that the new one didn't quite give that twist and give that motivation justice. With this one, it's a more personal betrayal, and thus it works better. In that, Javier Bardem's character, Mr. Silva, was a field agent for MI6 at the Hong Kong field office prior to the handover. And he basically started operating on his own and mucking around with the Chinese and pissed them off. And because M did not want to be the one responsible for mucking up a handover that was, well, decades in the making, handed him over. Because he'd bitten off, he was operating on his own, and he probably, and all things considered, he probably should have seen this coming. But, anyway. There's that. Also, Ralph Fiennes is in this. He plays a bureaucrat, or starts out as a bureaucrat, for the British government who basically is on the committee that is going to be grilling MI6 over mishandling the film's MacGuffin, which is a list of all the basically NATO intelligence organization field agents, both MI6 and CIA and so forth, who are operating in terrorist groups undercover to get information. And I mean, this isn't the first time a list like this has been MacGuffin in a spy film. If you remember the original Mission Impossible film, that was the MacGuffin there. But I think the difference here is it works better here than it did there. Because with this film, we kind of get some repercussions. And the film kind of works in an interesting way in terms of how to put this. The film, it could potentially get very conservative and very political. It could very much get into the realm of, I don't like WikiLeaks. I don't like government transparency, so I'm going to make government transparency and WikiLeaks the villain. There's a bit of that. But I think the film's villain is the no more secrets aspect of things from Sneakers. If you remember that film, it's a film where the bad guy wants to basically release the names and identities of every deep cover agent, and the good guys, which are a bunch of hippie liberals, don't want that, because it gets people killed. And I think the film kind of takes the stance, if it takes a political stance, that all things in moderation, that we need human intelligence, we need to keep secrets, we need to have spies on the ground to keep the world safe. There's a place for transparency, there's a place for openness, but there's also a place for privacy. A place for privacy in people's personal lives. There's a place for privacy for keeping the identities of all secret agents safe to make sure that they aren't killed. Basically, I'm saying that David. Well, this relates to some opinions of David Brin, but that's a thing for another time. I don't want to get too derailed and try to drag myself back on track here. This film also is very focused on M, almost more than every other Bond film that every other Bond film combined. It kind of shows how much that Judi Dench has affected the role of M, where before, M basically shows up at the beginning of the film, the end of the film, and that's it. Maybe has a little bit in the middle. But M was a minor character in the films. And now it's become the point where M is as big a role as a series, and M is an important character. And it goes to show that I think the best decision the Bond films have ever made, in terms of the various directors and in terms of Barbara Broccoli and the others, and the people who've been in charge of this, have done, the best decision they ever made was to basically make Judi Dench M, starting with the Brosnan Bond films. That was a perfect thing to do. I'm glad they did it. Which leads me to the film's, I guess you'd call it, its twist. Give me a second. Sorry about that. So, M. This is Judi Dench's last film as M. And they are not having her retire and putting her out to pasture. No? Put my eye there. They kill her off. This is the first M to die. Which is an impressive thing. And again, it says a lot about how M as a character has evolved and changed over these past 50 years of Bond. Where, I mean, through Connery, through Moore, they had no problem whatsoever changing M's without any real fanfare. I mean, I think Roger Moore went through like 2 M's, maybe 3, over his tenure. And he didn't, and there wasn't a quip or any fanfare about that in particular. Here, M dies, and she gets a death scene. And they make sure to give her a bunch of time here to basically give us as viewers a chance to say goodbye. And that really says how much that she's done, that Judi Dench has done for the role in the Bond series. And I do kind of hope that her successor, Ralph Fiennes, who you may remember from the Harry Potter films as Voldemort, he has big shoes to fill. Not just in terms of all of the other actors who came before, in terms of the fact that he has to transition from playing what is to some people the scariest film villain of their generation, and perhaps their generation's Darth Vader, in terms of Voldemort, and transition from that to M, who basically like a whole bunch of teenagers' maternal figure, kind of. I mean, yes, they have their parents, but but they go to the theater, they see M, and I'm not going to say they like M more than they like their parents, but I don't know. I thought M was really cool when I was in high school. I still think that Judi Dench's M is really cool, and I'm really interested to see where the character goes with the new M. Speaking of which, Q and Moneypenny, the other two of the big Bond film characters, are introduced for the first time here in terms of Bond's support group, I guess, and the MI6 characters. Now, after the death of Desmond Llewellyn, the original Q, who basically kind of did, over the course of like 25 films, 24, 25 films, did what Judi Dench was able to do in about not just 3, but like 6. After he died, they tried replacing him with John Cleese. He kind of worked, but it wasn't quite the same. And when they brought Bond back with Casino Royale, and for that matter also Quantum of Solace, there was no Moneypenny, there was no Q. And it was a daring decision to make on their part, on the one hand. But on the other hand, it kind of shows that all this weight of history had such big shoes to fill, and that when introducing a new Q, when introducing a new Moneypenny, you have to think about it and do it carefully. Because if you do it wrong, if the actor or actress doesn't fit, and if you basically if the character feels wrong, if the character is written incorrectly, the audience isn't going to cut you some slack for that. And I think they did a good job here figuring out what makes a good Moneypenny in this universe. what is a cue that Bond can show the same respect to that Desmond Llewellyn's cue had? And I think the film answers the questions very well. We'll see if these actors return in film number 4. Hopefully this isn't the last Daniel Craig Bond film, because on the one hand, if you're going to end the Daniel Craig trilogy, this isn't a bad place to do it, per se, on the one hand. On the other hand, this is a terrible place to end it. To bring in a new Bond actor, to bring in a new... to send in, possibly even recast Q or Moneypenny. Because we've grown accustomed... because we spent the time to introduce these actors in this role. Give them a chance to stick around and give them more time with it. That's what this film needs. This will lead to my next thing. Of this film, it is a 50th anniversary film. And at the same time, it very much shows how it's trying, well, in this new Bond universe, which is only 3 films in, trying to fit in 50 years of history. They find interesting ways to do it. They bring back the car that Bond won from Casino Royale, the DB5. But they also find a way to basically to do the gadgets in a fashion that is convincing and believable for a Bond film in terms of, well, basically they take the Bond gadgets that Mythbusters said would be plausible and would work, and those were the ones they incorporated in, which were the right decisions. Like the ejection seat and the machine guns. They don't do the smoke screen, though that's also plausible, but they do a good job of it. And I like how they handle it. And then they kill the car, but, well, I mean, honestly, it also sets up the other Bond, I guess you'd call it trait or tick, of Bond cars die. Bond goes through cars the way Man with a Head Cold goes through Kleenex. I mean, they kind of set this up a bit with the first 2 films. Bond's Aston Martin in Casino Royale flips in the most spectacular fashion ever. Bond's Aston Martin from opening of Quantum of Solace gets shot up and ripped up and tore up in a car chase. So, I mean, it's kind of to be expected, but this is still really impressive. The other thing it bears mentioning is this is the Bond film which goes where Bond has never really gone before. England. To a certain degree, this is understandable with the earlier Bond films. I mean, MI5 handles inside England, MI6 handles outside of England, and much is the same way that the FBI handles inside the United States and the CIA handles outside. But still, it's kind of interesting how much time that this film spends in the UK. It spends about half of it traveling to exotic locations throughout the world, in Asia, in the Middle East, particularly Turkey, and then we go to the UK, and the film finds an interesting way of making the UK seem like an exotic location. And this sounds silly, considering I'm an American and I've never been to the UK. But the areas of Scotland that they film in, the way they use the fact that the London Underground is massive and they're finding new tunnels all the time and that sort of thing. And there's the history of the London Underground and like Churchill's bunker complex and the stuff from the Second World War. They make it all work and make it seem exotic while at the same time being someplace where we've seen London a lot in film, even both in terms of American films and British films that made it over to the U.S. and so forth and so on. And I gotta give props for that, for making them the Bond film that says, let's make the mundane exotic, as opposed to other films which I'll have to admit came to a point towards the end of like Brosnan's run where they're going, let's make the exotic seem mundane. Like, oh wow, yes, Ice Palace. I mean, yeah. It really says a lot about this film and how really impressive it is. I strongly recommend you go see it. This is honestly one of the best Bond film of all time. It is, if it is the swan song for Daniel Craig, it is a hell of a way to go out. If not only will James Bond return, but Daniel Craig will return as James Bond in whatever his fourth outing will be, all the better. And I will happily get in line to go see it. Maybe not opening night, depending on budgetary situations, but I will see that film in a theater. And that pretty much covers my thoughts for this one. I will try to have the next Nintendo Power retrospective out by the middle to the end of the week. Until then, thank you for watching. Commercial style, as opposed to clever framing or neat stuff with lighting or that sort of thing. But with this film really, really gets artsy. Not like, how to put this? Seijun Suzuki level artsy. If you're familiar with Japanese art film, not necessarily art film, but Japanese kind of grindhousey stuff, or if you've seen Kill Bill Volume 1, you might have seen some homages to his style. A good example of this in Kill Bill Volume 1 is the scene with the crazy 88s. The part where everyone's in silhouette on a shifting colored background. And this film kind of does that. It does lots of stuff with lights and shadow. With silhouettes and voids and that sort of thing. It's the last thing you expect in a Bond film. Hello and welcome to a Breaking It All Down vlog. I am sorry for taking so long to get to the next Nintendo retrospective review, but, well, school's been causing problems, it's getting closer to midterms, all that fun stuff. With appropriate sarcasm on the fun. So, however, I did go see Skyfall today. I'm going to talk about that now, give my thoughts on it. I will try to go fairly far in to this video without giving spoilers. When it comes to spoiler time, I will hold up a notepad to the screen with the words "spoilers here" written on it. If you're watching this on the blip feed, then after this point I will put in a commercial, or at that point I will put in a commercial break, just to make it clear this is what the spoilers are, and that you can stop. I will try to do a similar thing on YouTube. Now, last time I did a movie review vlog, somebody reported it as being infringing or something, so I couldn't monetize it, so I might not be able to do the mid-thing ad roll. So, for the same so, again, look for the notepad. If you don't want spoilers past that point, don't watch any further. Now, for spoilers, I'm going to be considering as spoilers anything that's not covered in the trailer to the film. And also, won't go into details about I'll kind of discuss the opening credits sequence, because it's a Bond film. It's going to have a psychedelic opening credits sequence, but I'll try not to get too much into describing what it is. But anyway, as is a vlog, I will be drinking something. So, let us begin. First thing I gotta say is, this Bond film, as a film, I'll say it's the most un-Bond-like, because it's a Bond film, but it kind of shows off how far we've come since the old days of Sean Connery, and even, for that matter, Roger Moore, and all the way up to Brosnan. And I bring this up because this is the 50th anniversary of the franchise. And I'll be honest, most of the earlier Bond films, I would say practically all of the earlier Bond films, if you suggested do something I'm going to do something artsy in how I'm shooting this film, they'd say, "Oh, you mean you're going to do something clever and psychedelic for the opening credits, right?" And then if you said, no, beyond that, they'd look at you funny. You don't think of artsy stuff with lighting or framing or that sort of thing when you think of a Bond film. You may do quick editing and brisk cuts and that sort of thing. But other than that, the closest really came to sort of anything different or a distinct, really major style difference with the editing and stuff for a Bond film was kind of Die Another Day. But even then, Lee Tamahori's style was more of a quick-cut music video. When you think of a Bond film, you say, when you think of clever lighting, clever setting, clever set design, you think, oh, volcano base. You think, oh, interesting car chase. Maybe, oh, a sequence in the ice hotel. You think that. You don't think a fight scene done completely in silhouette, where it's done not like totally in shadow, like that's this bad ninja movie from the 80s, or there's their entire fight scene in the dark. Not like pitch black, can't see anything, but in silhouette. You don't think that. And that's what really makes all the difference. It's basically it's like the director said, you know, we take musical cues from the theme, from the title theme, and use that in the score throughout the movie. We've done that since the beginning. Why not we take little visual cues and ticks from the opening and find clever and inventive ways to work those in to the film?